Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you again. In case we haven't been introduced, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. In our continuing series, exploring the thoughts of an interesting person as evidenced in physical form in the book Role-Playing Mastery by Gary Gygax, creator of Dungeons & Dragons, we're continuing apace and moving into Chapter 6, Searching and Researching. And as with the other videos, I'm going to read the material to you, and then at the end, offer my own thoughts and assessment of what Gary had to say. And I'd love to hear what you think about what Gary had to say in the comments below. So take a listen, cogitate for a bit, and get back to me. So, Chapter 6, Searching and Researching. Now that you know the elements that make up role-playing game rules in general, and what can happen if too many liberties are taken with mixing and matching rules from different games, it's time to get down to specifics. Specific genres, that is. The genres of specific games are included in Appendix D. In the first part of this chapter, each of the significant different types of RPGs is described, both in terms of basic nature and on a comparative basis, delineating which features and concepts are present in some types and subtypes, but absent in others. Later in this chapter, you will learn about the need to have or develop a strong background in the genre of your game of choice. Some types of games demand less of the GM and the players in this regard than others, and the amount of background required may be a factor in the game you choose. If you are contemplating purchasing and learning a role-playing game for the first time, or if you are or might be considering switching from one type of game to another, the information here, combined with what you may already know about each of the genres, will help you make an informed decision on which type of game to obtain. Different types of games. Fantasy is at once the umbrella term that covers all role-playing games and one of the genres under that umbrella. All RPGs are fantastic in the sense that they depict game worlds, not real ones. But for our purposes here, the term refers to a type of game in which the natural laws governing our real world do not all apply or are supplemented by other laws that, as far as we know, are not part of our reality. You'd be surprised which ones are. The most popular fantasy RPGs are the Dungeons & Dragons game and the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game. In games such as these, magic works. The heroes and deities of legend and mythology are actual personages. People are capable of mental and physical feats that are unheard of, or at best, very rare in the world we live in. At least one of these three elements is present in a fantasy RPG, and all three may appear in some combination. Some fantasy games deal with amalgamations of legendary material and mythical stuff created by various and sundry writers. Others specialize, dealing only with worlds of the sort created by the game designer or the author of a work of fiction from which the game is drawn. At the opposite end of the fantasy spectrum from the wide scope games, typified by the D&D game, are those games based solely upon a specific aspect of the myth of our Earth, be it Arthurian legend or Norse saga. Science fantasy and science fiction games are related to the true fantasy role-playing game, the former more closely than the latter. Science fantasy games are based on advances and changes in science or evolution that are useful for the game, not necessarily probable. In discussing these games, the emphasis must be put on fantasy, not on science. For example, player characters may be able to project mental powers such as telepathy, teleportation, and telekinesis, which is sometimes an aspect of a true fantasy game as well. So eat it, psionic haters. The game system may also include mutations of flora and fauna, some of which could have mental as well as physical powers. The setting can be a form of alternate Earth, or perhaps an alien world where such strange creatures and powers occur naturally. Whether or not magic per se is included, the game system is magical in its approach. Typical science fantasy games include Judge Dredd and Psyworld. On the other hand, in a science fiction role-playing game, the emphasis is on science. Such games pay far more attention to scientific fact or extrapolation from scientific fact as the basis for their designs. The genre is broad, and the number of talented authors writing its literature is large. Players of science fiction RPGs can draw from science fiction novels, as well as good television and film offerings, some of which are based on these novels. Acceptance of science fiction as an entertainment form means that such games are quite popular. The general category of science fiction, SF, role-playing games is divided into three subcategories. First is the pure SF game, typified by the Star Frontiers game and Traveler. This sort of design deals with space travel, futuristic technology, and tactics in warfare, exploration of alien planets, and the social and governmental forms that might evolve on Earth or in an Earth-like environment in the next few centuries. In fantasy and science fantasy games, players take roles such as warriors, wizards, barbarians, mutants, or adventurers endowed with special mental powers. In a pure SF game, the typical character played as a spaceship pilot, an interplanetary explorer, a mercenary soldier, or a special intelligence agent. In a campaign in a pure SF game, players might encounter strange life forms that bear some resemblance to creatures of myth or make-believe, but space drives, sonic blasters, interstellar trading, and alien relations are the stuff of which the game is really made. The second subdivision of the science fiction category deals with the more immediate future in a form generally referred to as the post-Holocaust SF game. The Gamma World game is a good example of this subgenre. These games mix the fact of widespread or worldwide destruction, such as would occur in a nuclear war, with slightly advanced or altered technology. The result can be a setting, such as that of the movie The Road Warrior, which takes place in a part of the world that was not hit by very many or any bombs. Or the game can revolve around characters' attempts to survive and prosper in a place where bombs were dropped. The third category of science fiction games, which leads full circle back to the fantasy role-playing game, is what might be called the horror genre, or the unearthly SF game, predicated on past or present confrontation with aliens who live on or in or can come to Earth. One of the most popular games in this genre is Call of Cthulhu. The element of SF in these games is mixed well with horror to blend chilling struggles against ghastly aliens and their earthly servants. Such authors as H.P. Lovecraft, Algernon Blackwood, and Clark Ashton Smith represent the fountainhead of the literature from which this type of role gaming has sprung. To their concepts are married legendary materials such as vampires and ghosts. Likewise, a sprinkling of the stuff typical of 1930s pulp fiction, master criminals, occult powers, and fiendish plots woven by villains with strange scientific equipment or mental abilities can be tossed in to give the design a broader area of appeal and action. If the subject matter just related describes a circle from fantasy through science fantasy to science fiction and back again, it by no means covers the entire field of role-playing games. Above the entire circle just described, or some would say beneath it, lies the milieu of comic book superheroes. Two very popular superhero games, the Marvel Superheroes game and the DC Heroes game, supply participants with actual characters drawn from the two major comic lines, Marvel and DC. Others, such as Champions, enable the players to develop their own special fantastic creations to do battle and adventure in worlds inhabited by the likes of Superman, the Hulk, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, and so forth. Quite naturally, robotic heroes are an extension of such games. Time travel is one aspect of play that may be present in all fantasy and science fiction RPGs, including those based on comic books. Beyond the obvious, however, such potential is either implied or included in these RPGs. While sometimes included in fantasy, time travel is the subject of much science fiction. It ranges from delving into the past to future expeditions. Time Master is one game that uses time travel as its central theme. Specialized gaming utilizing this type of play must have a group, usually an agency of some sort, protecting time from the manipulations of evil or well-meaning but mistaken individuals. Because of the scope of the concept of time travel and the unknown future, such play certainly could cover all the many facets of the hobby, except perhaps for the true fantasy RPG. Heading off in a different direction altogether are the RPGs based on actual history or the real present. Espionage is quite a popular topic for games of this sort. Two popular products in this genre are the Top Secret game and the James Bond 007 game. Considering the success of James Bond in both print and film media, the popularity of espionage games is logical. However, since a role-playing game involves a group having adventures together, singling out a particular hero is not sufficient. Every player desires to be a hero, and obviously all cannot be an agent named James Bond, for example. In role-playing games, heroes are created by players, not played by casual partakers of singular adventure scenarios if the design is to be long-lived and enjoy continuing popularity. Allied to espionage designs are the detective role-playing products. Many diversions of this sort are sold as simple scenarios intended for one-time only usage. Party games in which the guests each take the role of a character in the scenario. A crime has been perpetrated, and through questioning and reasoning, each of the participants tries to determine who the criminal is, while the evildoer, if he or she is one of the characters in the scenario, tries to keep his true nature secret by giving out information designed to throw the others off the track. Although games of this sort are currently very popular and can be an enjoyable way to spend an evening, they do not qualify as true role-playing games since the activity is not ongoing and they are based on role assumption, not role-playing. Other detective games, though, such as Mercenaries, Spies, and Private Eyes, are true role-playing games that enable participants to create and develop a game milieu and ongoing characters who engage in adventurous activity over a large number of cases, a la Sherlock Holmes and Mike Hammer. From the standpoint of group activity, many of these games have the same problem as an espionage game that features a specific hero. Action in this genre often consists of happenings involving a single hero, a protagonist and an assistant, or more rarely, a pair of heroes. Gaming groups are more often composed of 6 rather than 3 participants, thus usually there are not enough choice characters to go around. The settings for espionage and detective RPGs range from the early Victorian era to modern times and beyond. Since spies were around before there were private detectives, RPGs based on such activity can go far back into history. To my knowledge, the only ones commercially available don't go back much further than a century, but that can change at any moment. Historical role-playing games are those designed to simulate what life was like in some past era. As has been pointed out before, some espionage and detective games can also be labeled historical games if they take place at a time previous to the present day. One popular type of historical game, closely related to espionage and detective games, is the sort that is played out during the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, that is, the period from 1920 to about 1937. The Gangbusters game is a good example of this form. Such RPGs typically offer action and adventure to participants playing as gangsters or law enforcement agents or both. The latter, by the way, does not mean that some participants only have roles as criminals or law enforcement characters. Ongoing games of this genre are often more enjoyable if each player has a game persona in both camps, as it were. The American West of the post-Civil War period has been the subject of 2 historical games with which I am familiar, the Boot Hill Game and Wild West. Participants become ranchers, drifters, cowboys, miners, gunmen, Indians, and other character types of the Old West. If you're interested in reliving the exploits of a swashbuckler in the time of the Three Musketeers, you can play Flashing Blades. How did my man ignore On Guard? If you want to experience the life of a privateer on the high seas, try Privateers and Gentlemen. Those are only some examples of historical role-playing games. Many other subjects and past eras are covered, and more will be covered in the years to come as new games are developed and marketed. The number of periods covered by role-playing games is broad, and at any given time there is no way to state absolutely which subjects are being offered. What has been offered, what is currently available, and what will be sold next year present widely varying lists, anchored by a few stable items. The ever-changing variety offered in the field is due to 2 things. First, consumer demand changes as players tire of one subject and decide to shift to another. This is a meaningful shift whenever it occurs because most subjects dealt with in RPGs have very small audience, a few thousand each. Second, there are quite a few very small publishers in the field. Some of these cottage industries will publish a game or 2 and then disappear, affecting the lists of games and subjects only for as long as the companies remain viable. Probably the best way of finding out the available games is to contact game publishers for their catalogs, send away for catalogs offered by the big mail-order firms in hobby gaming, and go to a game store or hardcore hobby shop and check things out with the people there. You should know the extent of what is offered. It is part of being involved in the hobby. Perhaps other games or adjunctive materials will be useful additions to your own field. Miniature figurines and scenics are quite an addition to those who desire spectacle. The dimension and perspective these accessories bring to a role-playing game are often enthusiastically received by participants. Whether you are the game master or one of the players of a game, you should know what is being offered in the varied lines of the products that serve the needs of gaming enthusiasts. Role-playing games are supplemented by quite a selection of professional and amateur periodicals. There are associations of dedicated enthusiasts. There are regular conventions held in various parts of the country. To be aware of these products and services is to become more involved and more skilled in your hobby. Listings of national associations and regional groups, conventions, and periodicals are contained in appendices A, B, and C. The magazines offer information in the form of articles, letters, news, and game scenarios. Their advertising alone is a service, for it keeps one aware of the latest materials available. Associations enable the exchange of ideas and competitive play opportunities for the truly dedicated gamer. Conventions enable personal interactions with gamers from all over the city, state, or continent. Opportunities to see new products, a chance to play some new games, and so on. Each of these things, periodicals, associations, conventions, takes you out of the vacuum of small group activity or community isolation. One would not claim to be an expert traveler, for instance, on the basis of having read many books on the subject and always having watched National Geographic Explorer on television. These activities may be evidence of a great interest in travel, but they are not themselves sufficient to warrant a claim of expertise in the field. When the enthusiast's library is expanded and cultural, social, and ecological materials added to his background, a truly serious interest can be acknowledged. The interest can be even further explored and indulged through the viewing of travel logs and the collection of maps, photographs, and souvenir materials. However, without the first-hand experience of actual travel by airplane, ship, railway, boat, auto, and all other means, the individual professing to be an expert traveler would be perpetuating a pretense. Imposture might be fun to read about, but it is hardly useful to the role game enthusiast outside actual play. To be an expert, it is necessary to know the whole gamut of gaming thoroughly. If you are to become a master of role-playing, you must know the field of games and associated products and services. You must know the active groups. You must keep abreast of current ideas and trends. A collection of material is necessary. Then you can move into role-playing and practice imposture through your game persona, knowing the world of your PC. The analogy about world travel used before was selected purposely. As a participant in a role-playing game campaign, you must be an expert on the world in which your game persona lives and has adventures. Perhaps you begin playing in an RPG because you always enjoyed the subject background of the game, whether it is fantasy, science fiction, or historical. On the other hand, you simply may have been introduced to a particular game accidentally, finding the concept of role-playing fascinating rather than the background basis of the game. In either case, to hope to achieve mastery, you must be caught up in role gaming sufficiently to have a strong desire to excel. To illustrate the depth needed to establish oneself as an expert in the milieu chosen, consider the following example. In the mid-1960s, a group of ambitious students at Stanford University undertook a project that mixed the internation simulation concept with board games of the conflict simulation sort and with a bit of military miniatures. As I recall, it was labeled the Ad Hoc Committee for the Reconstruction of World War II, a massive, fairly chaotic effort using the energies of several people plus computer assistants. I participated in the role of the Chinese Communist commander. My good friend and the co-founder of TSR Inc., Don Kay, was naturally the Chinese nationalist commander. Wading boldly into the chaos, not aware of exactly what I needed to know, but wanting to leave no source untapped, I proceeded to acquire books on the history, culture, agriculture, politics, and literature of China. I needed to know these things to understand the people and the politics of China. Of course, I bought maps, military histories, and even writings of Chairman Mao, the person I played in the game. At the same time, I tried to learn about the economy and who and what the so-called nationalists, my opponents, were and their resources in thinking, manpower, weapons, and what have you. Some 2 months later, after all the participants had mailed off their extremely lengthy strategic worksheets, but before any tactical moves had been submitted, the whole effort collapsed under its own weight. Apparently, there was simply too much for the game masters at Stanford to keep track of, and they didn't appreciate the scope of what they were trying to do until most or all the participants had invested a lot of time in research and preparation. I profited from the knowledge I gained, but there was scarcely any gaming fun at all. Fortunately, role-playing game campaigns are not by their nature subject to this form of internal breakdown. The great majority of role-playing games do not attempt to simulate precisely some certain aspect of reality or history, unlike the abortive World War II simulation. So when you set about an in-depth study of your milieu, you won't be subject to the same hazard. Complete immersion in the make-believe world actually requires a fair amount of real knowledge. Even as whimsical a milieu as the fantasy world requires a firm background knowledge of many subjects. After all, fantasy games are based on a mixture of reality, actual or imagined, and myth. Even fairy tales that deal with giants, dragons, magicians, wicked witches, and enchantments also contain people, dwellings, and interpersonal dealings drawn from society at that time. In this light, you will understand why I recommend the reading of works such as A History of the Art of War in the Middle Ages, Town Government in the 16th Century, The Domesday Book, The Welsh Wars of Edward II, and Numbers in History. Armor, weapons, fortification, siegecraft, costume, agriculture, politics, heraldry, and warfare are the meat and drink of a serious participant in a game such as Dungeons & Dragons. The same applies, with some few differences, to any milieu considered. A game involving the work of a single author might seem to be an exception. After all, couldn't one simply become intimately familiar with the author's work and thus have a masterful background for gaming? The answer is no. The author of the work has a broad background, and from this knowledge and his imagination created the work. Then an RPG was designed from a combination of the author's material and the game creator's effort. So it is also important to know and use the material the game designer utilized. The primary source for campaign detail is, of course, the game itself. The secondary sources are the author's work and whatever else the game designer utilized in creating the role game. Beyond those, we have tertiary sources, works that the author was influenced by and used in his writing, and other material the game designer used. The pyramid gets broader as we go deeper. In some cases, a really energetic student of a game based on a single author's work may benefit from examining the works that influence the author's and designer's sources, and so on. For example, one company has produced a role-playing game based on the writings of J.R.R. Tolkien, specifically his books and stories set in the fantastic land of Middle-earth. The primary source material for the game master is the game itself. Beyond that, a game master who aspires to an intimate knowledge of this milieu should read the author's works and keep them on hand for reference. He should also learn about Tolkien by reading biographical and autobiographical information to determine which literature, myths, and legends influence the author's creation of his fantasy world, and then peruse Tolkien's source material. Likewise, the game master should examine previously published role-playing games and then compare them with the game in question to ascertain which things influenced the designer and how the designer interpreted and presented these concepts in his own game. This need not be the end of the information gathering process, for as noted, the quest can go on indefinitely, but this much work ought to give any student a solid and sizable background. In science fiction, we seem to run into another exception. However, it is again a case of delving into subject areas from which the author of the work drew information. In addition, a broad background of material in the genre, specifically in that portion of SF in which the author in question wrote the work, enables the game participant to excel. Furthermore, if the author is of real substance and his work has been around for some time, it is a safe bet that there will be associated works to draw upon. These associated works will be influenced by and at least peripherally touch on the same material as the original author did. How many readers of H.P. Lovecraft have read The Willows, The King in Yellow? While most are probably familiar with The Hounds of Tindalos, only the devoted few will have managed to find and read the two former works. Time to go back to your Necronomicon for all the rest of you. Because so much is required in regard to developing a background with both breadth and depth, it is quite unlikely that you can accomplish this in the near future. But don't throw up your hands and surrender. Most of the reading and study is fun. All of it is informative, from mythology to metaphysics, philosophy to psychology to physics. Meanwhile, you still get to enjoy playing the game or games of your choice. Developing a knowledge pool that will make you a master at role game play is not something you do right away and all at once. You do it gradually, as enjoyment, as education, when you have leisure time that is not otherwise occupied. Read books on the subject when you read. Watch television programs that have application. Whether they're based on fantasy, history, or fiction of the possible future, all RPGs consider whole worlds. Knowledge of the real world is used to design all such games, and thus it is valuable in any game milieu. As an aside, I wish to assure readers that many a nature program on television has given rise to new and more terrible creatures for inclusion in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game. Most recently, I saw something on the cone shell snail, a marine creature of a most horrible sort. Notes are now on file for its possible inclusion in a supplement to the game one day. For those who are students, remember this. Most of what you're learning now applies not only to some aspect of your present and future life, but it is also fuel for your gaming. English allows communication, for example. Knowing it well means you can understand and be understood better. Every subject has its value. In life and in games too. Don't waste any learning time. The opportunity passes all too quickly. Save other pursuits for other times and use class time wisely. It will build your enjoyment of life later on as you learn to apply the new material to your gaming. It works. Consider two other works. One is the Boy Scout Handbook. The other is the Army Survival Manual. If you're actually to perform or experience everything contained within the pages of these two books, you would be well on your way to becoming a true explorer. In real terms, you would be self-sufficient under extreme conditions. You would be able to survive, or at least to survive more easily and more comfortably by using your knowledge. In game terms, You could use the same knowledge to enable your characters to function and survive under adverse physical conditions in the majority of the make-believe worlds of adventure. Since these make-believe worlds, by and large, are actually based on Earth, or at least on an Earth-like environment, your real-world knowledge is transferable. You and your characters will know how to determine direction, and thus, it is hoped, keep from getting lost. You will know how to perform basic first aid, which could save the life of a character in dire straits, and the list goes on. Coupled with what you know now and what you will learn in the future, how much broader is your knowledge base? How much greater your self-sufficiency level in other conditions? While there is no method of actually learning magic and there are no starships to pilot yet, much of what lies between can be known. What is needed is a program of expanding your learning with regard to the game world you have selected to adventure in. The program you establish will be entirely self-imposed and self-directed. It must fit your available time and cannot go beyond the limits of materials you can obtain. It can be as limited or as expansive as you decide, but unless you commit yourself to staying with it, you will never truly master your role gaming. In order to assist you in the undertaking, an outline of activity follows, using the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game as an example of a general fantasy RPG and the James Bond 007 game as an example of a game specifically drawn from one author's works. This outline is, of course, only a suggestion, for actual pursuit requirements will vary according to the RPG you have chosen to master. Outline of study for mastery. 1. Acquisition and perusal of primary source material of the game milieu. Example 1. Because of the broad general background upon which the AD&D game was based, this activity would cover familiarization with the entire set of books that are the game system, at least the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and one or more of the compendiums of monsters. Monster Manual 2, Fiend Folio Tome. Other sources that might be used, depending on the amount of detail and the type of game milieu desired, include the Legends and Lore book, Dungeoneer's Survival Guide, Wilderness Survival Guide, and Oriental Adventures. Example 2. For the 007 game, this would mean the acquisition and perusal of the basic game system, plus the accessory materials, including the Q manual and the various adventures designed for the system, Octopussy, Goldfinger, etc. 2. Acquisition of closely related materials. Example 1. For AD&D gaming, this includes both acquisition of at least some of the works listed in the Inspirational and Educational Reading Appendix of the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, plus the acquisition and study of another fantasy role-playing game in the genre. Example 2. For the 007 game, the aspiring expert would read all the James Bond books written by Ian Fleming and would likewise get a copy of a similar game, such as the Top Secret game. Beyond this, helpful information can be found in books and articles about Fleming's works, in factual accounts about spies and espionage, and in other novels in the espionage genre. 3. Immersion in the hardcore of adventure gaming. A. Subscribing to at least one professional magazine. B. Joining a National Association of Role Gamers. C. Attending one or more conventions devoted to the hobby of game playing in general and RPGs in particular. D. Optionally, joining an active local club and or subscribing to at least one amateur magazine. 4. Determination to use leisure time activities to broaden your base of understanding of RPGs and the particular milieu you have chosen to specialize in. A. Use of reading opportunities. B. Acquisition of printed material, fiction, history, maps, etc. C. Viewing related television programs. D. Selecting and viewing related films. E. Using any other sources. 1. Travel. 2. Museums. 3. Information from experts. 5. Development of a research collection. A. Collection of printed materials. 1. Books and pamphlets. 2. Periodicals. 3. Maps. 4. Games. And B. Collection of all manner of other associated materials. Mastering role-playing is a long-term undertaking. Any such effort, however, cannot help but make you a broader and more knowledgeable individual. So the game, as they say, is well worth the candle. I've never heard that before. Who says that? The library and collection of materials you acquire over the course of time will have its own intrinsic value. You will have benefited from the study of it, and should the time come when you no longer desire to possess part or all of the material, you will find that there is a collector value in many items. The last I heard, the offer price for Dragon Magazine #1 was as high as $200, which back then was some serious money. Thanks, inflation. The path to role-playing mastery begins with searching and researching. First, you must search within yourself and examine the field of available RPGs to determine which genre or genres to concentrate on. Then you must research. Find out all you can about the areas you want to explore. Knowledge is the key, and your knowledge of a genre and its attendant background material must be so deep and so broad that you feel at home within that genre just as much as you feel at home in the world in which all of us actually live. In this case, familiarity does not breed contempt, but quite the opposite. Familiarity leads to fun and fulfillment, and both of those benefits will be yours in full measure if you immerse yourself in the role-playing game hobby and take advantage of all it has to offer. And that is Chapter 6, Searching and Researching. Now, that last bit that he talked about, basically I'll sum it up as the genre, or milieu as he loves to call it, that you're interested in gives you excuses to look into anything you want to look into. Or conversely, if there is a particular niche that you're already interested in, and then you find a role-playing game tailored for that, well, that's a no-brainer. You should go check that out. And this has worked on me in the past because as a teenager, I got seriously into Roman history and the Byzantine period in particular. And when I was going around one of the mall bookstores when we had things like that, and I saw that the vampire game not only had a Dark Ages line, but they also had a book called Constantinople by Night, I was intrigued. So I checked it out, and frankly, that's some of the best material that I think I've seen as far as immersing a player into the setting, because they did their history research. And the Vampire Dark Ages line was actually really interesting in the diversity of topics that it dove into in real world history. Now, of course, they changed it around to fit into the game itself and the stories they wanted to tell, but that was a great jumping off point for me, learning all kinds of things and doing deep dives into topics of religion, history, economics, and more. And when I started running the vampire 4-part adventure series, the Transylvania Chronicles, that gave me even more excuse to do historical research to immerse my players and myself in the setting, so much to the point that I wound up going to Transylvania and checking out several of the cities that we played in so I could get a sense of the place and understand how it was. And I'm still a little resentful at Alba Iulia not recognizing me as their undying vampire lord. But seriously, y'all, Romania and Transylvania in particular, it's actually really beautiful. I know in movies it gets portrayed as this dark, foreboding place full of danger and mystery, but it's really gorgeous. And I'd highly recommend checking it out. And one city associated with Vlad Tepes, Dracula, is Sighisoara or Shawsburg. To an American, it's such a unique locale in that you have this old city up on the hill, and then further up that hill, you have a cemetery, and it's as atmospheric as you might want, but in a pretty way. In addition to that, I have chosen other places to visit around the world at great expense because of an experience I had in a game, or that I want to have in a game, and I want to get a sense of the place and learn more about it. It's paid off. And to talk about genres, there's been an explosion of genres covered by role-playing games since Gary wrote this book. So you can get anything such as absurdist British humor in an RPG with the game Troika, which I think is an absolute disaster in the one experience that I had with it, but it's not for me. I'm not all wibbly-wobbly, apparently. And the example I like to bring up all the time, the Jane Austen RPG, Good Society, and various other cozy RPGs. There's anime-based RPGs. There's the original Vampire game, which was a game based on personal horror. So it was horror, not really in the sci-fi sense, but in the psychological sense, and so much more. And particularly in this day and age, you can pretty much find a copy of any game or periodical that you're looking for from the past or being put out now, print on demand or in PDF form. We live in a time of embarrassment of role-playing game riches, whereas in the past, if you didn't find a copy on your local game or bookstore shelves of something, you were probably never going to see it. And so that's why it was important for you to be part of those associations, to talk to other people in the RPG hobby, because they might be able to help you run down a copy of it, or at least get you a photocopy of it, and ask you for those catalogs. When the world was less digital and more analog, you had to put a lot more effort into getting copies of role-playing games and having the experiences that we take for granted these days. But I highly recommend you pursue at least some of the options that Gary recommends here, because I know they've enriched my life so much. Attending role-playing game conventions, it's got me a lot of friends and a lot of work that I would have never otherwise had. And they're really cool people, and some of you are watching right now, and I appreciate it. I watch your stuff too, believe me. And the health of the hobby is measured by how much we're doing with it. It's not based on Hasbro sales numbers. It's how much activity are the hobbyists involved generating. and much of what I do on this channel is a reflection of my contribution to it. And all the editing work I get to do for wonderful folks such as Joe Block and Ryan Howard, and creative works I'm collaborating with others on. So if I'm not truly a role-playing master, I am working the steps to get there. And part of that is exposure to other types of role-playing games that I wouldn't normally play, just so I can see how they're doing it, how they structure their games, and what kind of experiences can be reaped from it. So my dear friends, connect with each other and do what you can to advance yourself in a hobby, whether it's a role-playing game hobby, gardening, or whatever else you want to do. Quit scrolling for a minute and talk to people, go outside and do something. And I'm going to go do that right now. So thank you for spending time with me and Gary Gygax's book, Role-Playing Mastery. And my dear friends, that's what I've got for now. Again, I welcome your comments below, and remember to like, subscribe, and share. And until next time, I wish you nothing but the best.